thinking what I think you're thinking.
I think I am thinking what you think I think you're thinking.
Welcome to another edition of This Day in History here on the GoodMicWork channel. We've got two very memorable days to talk about in back-to-back years in this episode. September 22nd, 1996 and September 22nd, 1997. I have fond memories of both of these nights. One was a very significant pay-per-view and the other was a very significant Raw. We'll start out in 1996. This was the night of the In Your House Mind Games pay-per-view. This event was held in Philadelphia, and it was very significant for many reasons. Now, for those of you who weren't around or didn't watch wrestling during this time, this was 20 years ago. This is the 20th anniversary of this show. And what we had seen from WWE throughout the beginning of 1996 and back into 1995 and 1994 was a very kind of childish product. And ECW had just started making some waves with their violent and extreme form of wrestling, and Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon kind of talked to each other a little bit, and the WWE was holding this show. They were holding their childish little event in Philadelphia. The last time they did this in 1995 was at the King of the Ring, and the fans shit all over it. They would go back to Pennsylvania for another In Your House the previous December, the one with Brett and Bulldog that got all bloody. I think that one was in Hershey, but it was still in ECW territory. So WWE kind of gave the fans a little bit of blood. But in this pay-per-view, we got a very interesting title match. It was a match that I would not have expected WWE to do at this time for the title, and that was Shawn Michaels versus Mankind. Mankind was coming off two enormous summer victories over The Undertaker. He beat him at King of the Ring, and then he beat him again in the Boiler Room Brawl with Paul Bearer turning on The Undertaker at SummerSlam. So in storyline, it made perfect sense for Mankind to get a title shot. He definitely earned it, beating the Phenom twice, but it was still very surprising to see a guy that just came into the company, you know, in March, right after WrestleMania, a guy that Vince McMahon really didn't even want there, and physically was not your prototypical type of wrestler or superstar that the WWE would push or market back in the day. To see Foley get this title shot was pretty amazing. And it was brilliant of the WWE to do that. They knew that if they were going to go into Philadelphia, they had to give those fans something different to watch and something a little bit more extreme than what they have seen from WWE in the past, or the fans could wind up sabotaging the show. Right around this time, 20 years ago, was when the fans started getting a lot more vocal and they stopped just accepting whatever the WWE would give them. So this, I think, is a credit to the WWE for at least going in a particular direction for this specific show, ensuring that the crowd was going to get a good, exciting show and they were going to be into the event. And boy, did Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels come through. There were so many great spots and so many unique spots in this match that gave the fans a nice balance of wrestling and a little bit of hardcore action as well, instead of it just being all one or the other. This match wasn't just table bumps and chair shots. There was psychology to it. There was wrestling to it. There was a great story that was told. The Undertaker and some other guys tied into this thing as well. The match started with Paul Bearer bringing Mankind out to the ring, wheeling him out there in one of the Undertaker's caskets. And he opened up the lid. Mankind comes out. He's rocking back and forth with the urn. Shawn Michaels then makes his entrance, and they proceed to have a very, very aggressive and different style of match than we were used to seeing from the WWE around this time. Now, Shawn had worked with Vader the month before, and that match had its moments, but nothing that Shawn did with Vader was anywhere near as physically brutal as what he did with Mankind in this match. Some of the notable spots in this thing, Mankind did the famous move where he ties his neck into the ropes, the same move that took his ear off, I think, in Germany against Vader in WCW all those years ago. This was back when Mankind was crazy, like squealing and pulling out his own hair. He even pulled out some sort of foreign object out of his pocket. It just looked like a shank or something. He just started stabbing himself in the leg with it out of frustration. There was a back body drop on the exposed cement, and then Shawn Michaels threw the mat on top of Foley after he backdropped him and then stomped on it. Probably the most famous spot of the match was the big table bump that they took, because you knew they moved the table out way, way earlier in the match. So the Spanish announce table is just like kind of askewed on the outside of the ring, and it just sat there for like 20 minutes. So you knew eventually there was going to be some sort of a spot on the table. And Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels up the ante a little bit and take a pretty sick back bump right through that table. So that was probably the spot of the match. But I don't even know if it was my favorite spot. I think my favorite one, came a little bit later on near the end when Mankind is back up on the top rope with a chair, and Shawn Michaels gets like a running start and springboards himself off another chair set up in the ring and super kicks Mankind right off the top rope, chair right in the face. It was fucking brilliant. And then they threw some magic tricks at us in this match. They did a spot where Mick wants to push Shawn Michaels into the casket. So Paul Bearer opens the lid, and he tries to push Shawn in, but he fights it away, and Paul Bearer ends up closing the lid again. All sorts of interference starts happening near the end of this match. I mentioned Vader earlier on. He does a run-in. Shawn Michaels ends up fighting him off. And then Mankind wants to try to put Shawn in the casket one more time, and Paul Bearer opens the lid, and out comes The Undertaker, shocking the shit out of me. I watched this live on pay-per-view, and I'm like, holy hell, how the hell did that happen? We've already seen Mankind get out of the casket. We've seen the casket lid open once or twice throughout the match. How the hell did he get in there? It wasn't until I went back and watched the replay that I noticed that the entire casket had a curtain down hanging below it. So when they wheeled it out to the ring, Undertaker was probably either underneath there or he was underneath the ring and hanging out there from his previous match. And there was a way for him to get inside the casket from there. So that was a really cool effect, and one that I didn't see coming, and it surprised the hell out of me. And he wound up running off Mankind, giving Shawn Michaels the victory via disqualification, which I also liked because it kept Mankind strong. I mean, think about the year he had. We hear the stories about how Vince, basically signed Mick Foley kicking and screaming. He didn't even want to do it, and he insisted on covering up his face if he did. They end up bringing him in, and he turns out to be a great character. He's there 6 months. He's getting a WWE title shot. He beats The Undertaker twice, and Shawn Michaels isn't even able to defeat this guy clean. So Mankind was on a roll during this time in 1996, and it gave that Philadelphia audience a great match. They're familiar with Mick Foley as Cactus Jack. They know who he is. WWE not only put a guy that the Philadelphia fans would accept in the main event against Shawn Michaels, but they also gave the fans a type of match that they would appreciate and respect as well. Now, speaking of ECW, another cool thing that the WWE did is that they had Paul Heyman, the Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer show up in the front row during, I think, the opening match between Savio Vega and Bradshaw. And this was another thing that was extremely rare and strange to see. And I remember when I saw those guys sitting there in the front row, I'm like, holy fuck, ECW guys are in the front row. At that time, I wasn't sure if they bought a ticket or not. Looking back now, I'm pretty sure it was all set up. I don't even know if I ever heard the story on this, but I'm certain that Vince and Paul Heyman worked this out for these guys to make an appearance. And they're drinking beer out there and acting all ECW-ish. They're decked out in their ECW gear. And I think it's Sandman who winds up taking a big sip of beer and spitting it all over Savio Vega. And then the security guards rush in and kind of separate Bradshaw and Savio from the ECW guys, and they kind of eject them out of the building. So it was a really nice, little thing that the WWE did, like I keep saying, for this time. This is not something that we would see from them very often. They knew they were under the gun, getting killed by WCW. Vince McMahon was trying to think of different ideas, and it was probably in his best interest to have a working relationship with Heyman before Heyman could develop one with WCW. So he would incorporate them a little bit. They would make occasional appearances. They would do this again, I think, in 1997, when ECW would actually invade Raw at the Manhattan Center. And this was set up by a couple of previous Raws where more ECW guys were making appearances in the audience. As a matter of fact, I think one of those Raws was back at the Hershey building where Brett and Davies' match was. And I remember Taz being out there or something like that. I think that was the same set of shows that Mark Marrow might have won the Intercontinental title in like a tournament. And I don't know, it might even have been the same one where the new Razor and Diesel debuted. I could be wrong there. Anyway, that's way off point. But the point is, this really kick-started what I think was the working relationship between WWE and ECW, and it worked out great for WWE. And they didn't stop there. We also got some edgier promos, too. This was when Bret Hart was on his hiatus after losing to Shawn at WrestleMania 12, and he had been rumored to come back. And the first guy that he was going to work with when he did come back was going to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. And Austin had started calling out Bret Hart on WWE TV. He had just won the King of the Ring a couple of months before. For some reason, he was left off the SummerSlam card, a card that was very weak and could have used him. They had him on the pre-show beating Yokozuna in like 90 seconds or something. Really stupid decision there. Especially if they're trying to build this guy up for Bret. Give him an opponent on the main card and have him beat him. To me, that's just a fucking no-brainer. And he doesn't have a match on this pay-per-view either, although he does have a promo with Brian Pillman and Owen Hart. Owen Hart at the time was still very anti-Bret Hart. He was still at odds with his brother. When you think about how hard the Hart Foundation feuded with Stone Cold Steve Austin and other guys, to see Owen and Austin in the ring there on the same side talking shit to Bret Hart is kind of weird, especially when you throw Pillman in the mix, who was another Hart Foundation member. So this was several months before that group completely formed, and Pillman and Owen didn't like Bret. They were both heels. Austin was a heel, calling out Bret all the time. And the three of them went out there and just shit all over Bret Hart, and especially Austin did. He had that famous line, "If you put the letter S in front of Hitman, you have my exact opinion of Bret Hart." That was fucking brilliant, and they couldn't have done it in front of a better crowd. Austin was mean, he was disrespectful, he was nasty, he was cursing, and he was just raking Bret Hart over the coals, setting up their inevitable feud, and it was great stuff. And, when I see that image of Owen and Pillman and Austin in the ring together, man, it just it takes my breath away how great those times were. And two of those guys are dead. Owen and Pillman, of course, died just a couple of years after this. And of course, I would be a huge asshole if I didn't mention the other significant thing that took place on this show. This event marks the 20th anniversary of Mark Henry's in-ring debut in the WWE. He took on and defeated Jerry the King Lawler. It's been 20 years for Sexual Chocolate in the WWE. That's amazing. Good for him. Congratulations on such a long, awesome run, Mark Henry. I know he's winding things down now, probably won't be in the ring much longer, but I'm incredibly proud of him because this is a guy that WWE, I think, signed because they were so desperate for publicity because WCW had stolen so many guys. They were kicking their asses in the Monday Night War. The NWO was rolling. WWE needed some sort of a publicity. And when they saw this guy was a former Olympian, he went on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which they never shut the fuck up about. But it's so funny how much they needed the publicity. They needed people that were out in the public eye. And I think in Vince's head, because he likes big monsters, he thought that he could really market and push this guy into a big star. And plus, he didn't want WCW to get their hands on him and start touting his Olympic achievements and all of that. So I think Mark Henry was just the right type of guy at the right time and was able to land a huge deal. Now, he struggled at first. I mean, he was pretty weak in the ring, didn't know a whole lot about what he was doing in there, and he had some attitude problems. I remember listening to him on Chris Jericho's podcast a while back, and he admits that he had kind of attitude problems. He took himself too seriously because he's an Olympian, and, he's been training to compete and win his whole life, and I think he had a hard time separating WWE from that, and I think he rubbed some people the wrong way at first, and, he eventually straightened out. WWE, I think, sent him down to the developmentals a couple of times to work on his weight or work on other things here or there, but for the most part, Mark Henry has been a pretty steady competitor on the roster, and he's been there a long time, and he's developed a hell of a legacy for himself. He's had some interesting characters, he's had some interesting storylines, he's done a lot of things. When he first came in, he was the respectful, happy, white meat babyface. He also had some comedy mixed in some of his characters, like the Sexual Chocolate. He was also an ass-kicking machine later on with the Hall of Pain. He really had a nice, well-rounded career. I'm very proud of Mark Henry. I've always been a big fan of his. I've always thought he was just an incredibly nice guy. I still get furious when I hear the story of, like, somebody taking a shit in a sandwich, because Mark seems like a very sensitive person. We've seen him cry on WWE TV a few times. And just the idea of him sitting there with his food and there's a turd in it and him probably having his feelings hurt kind of hurts my feelings, and it pisses me off that stuff like that even goes on in wrestling. I'm all for lighthearted ribs, but something like malicious like that, like putting excrement in somebody's food, if somebody did that to me, I would still be kicking their ass. But congratulations again to Mark Henry on a hell of a career. Very happy for you that you were able to hang around in the WWE for 20 plus years. And it looks like he's down to his last year, possibly two at the most. And I hope he's able to retire in a nice way. And I think he should go into the Hall of Fame one day as well. So, Mark Henry, thanks for your 20 years of service in the WWE. We love you. Moving on to the other show I wanted to discuss. This took place 1 year to the day later at Madison Square Garden in 1997 for Monday Night Raw. This was a highly advertised show. WWE was going back to the Garden for a Raw. They had never been there for a Raw before. And we knew a lot of major things were going to take place on this show. They had been teasing for weeks that Vince McMahon was most likely going to eat a Stone Cold Stunner on this Monday Night Raw. Austin had been pile-driven on his head by Owen Hart at SummerSlam. He was out of action for a while, but he was still appearing on TV. They were running the angle where he wants to work, but WWE can't allow him to because it's a liability. He could get injured, he could get paralyzed, and they simply cannot allow him to get in the ring. So he's stunning Sergeant Slaughter and Jerry Lawler and all these guys, and eventually you knew he was going to probably get Vince McMahon. We had not really seen Vince get physical ever And what better place for it to happen than in Madison Square Garden in Vince McMahon's building? Vince was still an announcer by this point. He was almost out of the commentary booth. He would stay there up until the Survivor Series, and then he would be gone. But Vince was still known by the casual audience as just the Raw announcer. Some people still, to that day, did not even know that he owned the WWE. But the fans who did and the people that paid attention to shit behind the scenes, they were the ones that WWE created this moment for. For us to see the owner of the WWE, the guy that we know who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes for all these years, to finally get physically beaten up was going to be a pretty amazing thing for us to see. And it went off awesomely, except for Vince's horrible sell. Austin is in the ring kicking everybody's ass, and then Vince jumps off the commentary booth and gets in the ring and explains to Austin that there's a reason why WWE won't allow him in there. I think he might have even mentioned that he owns the WWE, or Austin's boss, and he goes, "We just can't let you wrestle. We want you back as much as you want to get back, but we just can't let you do it." And that's when Austin delivers the line, "I appreciate the fact that you care about my well-being, and I appreciate the fact that you can kiss my ass," and then nails Vince with a stunner, and the crowd exploded. And what the fuck is with Vince's horrible sell? I mean, the way he flopped on the ground like that and his eyes are wide open, it's probably one of the worst sellings of the Stone Cold Stunner that we've ever seen. But the very fact that Vince was stunned for the first time in Madison Square Garden was pretty awesome. I didn't care that Vince sold it like a shithead. It was still a very amazing and historic moment. Austin then gets arrested and gets carted off to jail or whatever. And that was pretty much the beginning of the Austin McMahon feud. It didn't really get cooking until Austin won the world title after WrestleMania, but that was basically the beginning of it. And after the Screwjob, Vince McMahon would turn into that evil son of a bitch character. And we're going to talk about the Screwjob in just a second, because some things took place on this show that set the Screwjob in motion. But first, we'll also talk about another amazing moment involving Mick Foley 1 year after his amazing match with Shawn Michaels. This was Cactus Jack's debut in the WWE. Mankind had already transformed throughout this year into Dude Love, won the tag team titles with Austin, and was kind of going in between Mankind and Dude Love. And he's set to face Triple H in a no-holds-barred, anything-goes match on Monday Night Raw, kind of a hardcore match for the New York crowd at MSG, which is a nice thing to put on this card. And then WWE did one better, where they have Dude Love come up on the Titantron, and he goes, "As much as I want to be in there and kick heavy-duty booty, I think I know somebody that can do a better job in a hardcore environment than me." And he brings out Mankind, and they do a split screen, and then Mankind comes in, and they high-five, and Mankind's like, "I want to do horrible things to Triple H, too. I dream about it every night, but I think there's somebody else that can even do a better job than me." And I love the line where Dude Love's like, "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" And then Mankind goes, "I think I am thinking what you think I think you're thinking," or whatever the hell it was. And then out comes Cactus Jack, and he basically says, "Triple H, you're about to have a real bad day." And then the music hits. Great Cactus Jack music. I always loved that entrance theme. And the music hits. He comes through the curtain. You saw the flash bulbs going off. It was an amazing moment. He comes down to the ring. Triple H tries to attack him in the aisleway, and the brawl was on. They were all over the arena for this thing. The match ended on the stage in a very dangerous spot with Cactus Jack pile driving Triple H through a table onto the steel grating area there. Crazy spot. Could have been a lot worse. Mick really protected Triple H. If you ask me, that bump hurt Mick a lot more than it hurt Triple H. But Mick draped his arm over Triple H, and the referee counted 3 right there on the stage, and it was an awesome win for Cactus Jack and an awesome moment. And it was another example of WWE catering to the town that they're in. They did it the year before in Philadelphia, and now they did it on this night at Madison Square Garden. So that was an awesome Monday Night Raw for that time, because Raw was in smaller venues, and wrestling was kind of in the shitter. So finally they were starting to pick up some steam, and putting Raw in Madison Square Garden was awesome. And that moment with Cactus Jack and Stone Cold sticks out as a major part of 1997. Now, internally, another story took place at this show. This was the day that Vince McMahon told Bret Hart that he did not want to honor his contract. He told him backstage before the show. He said that the company is in financial trouble and they simply cannot afford to pay Bret what they agreed to pay him for 20 years. Bret signed a 20-year deal 1 year prior, and here it is, just 1 year into that 20-year deal, and Vince wants out. and asks Bret Hart to call WCW and try to get his old deal that he was offered the year before, $3 million a year or whatever. And this all took place backstage at Madison Square Garden before this Raw aired. And to me, that meeting that Vince and Bret had triggered so much. I mean, this was the day that the course of WWE really was changed, because once Vince had that conversation with Bret and he was off to WCW, that set the Screwjob in motion. That birthed the Vince McMahon evil heel character. That also birthed the Austin McMahon feud and storyline that was probably the greatest feud that's ever taken place in professional wrestling. It launched Stone Cold Steve Austin, because after the Screwjob, Shawn went to work with Taker and got his back hurt and had to retire for 4 years. So had this conversation with Bret Hart and Vince McMahon not taken place, the WWE would look dramatically different than it does today. So many things would have gone differently had Bret and Vince not had a conversation on September 22nd in 1997. We could be looking at a completely different company. Without the Screwjob, you don't get Vince. You might not get Austin to the degree. I still think Austin would become a star, but maybe not to the level that he did. Shawn Michaels may have never gotten injured, which means he wouldn't have had to retire. And it would have been a lot harder for Austin to get on the map if he was on the same roster with Shawn and Bret. That could have also adversely affected The Rock and Triple H in the future. There's so many things that could have gone differently for the WWE if Vince McMahon just would have kept Bret on and not terminated the contract with him at all. So I look back on this day in history as a very big one in 1996, and especially 1997 specifically. Just a random backstage conversation between a promoter and a talent that wound up changing the course of professional wrestling history. So that is it for this latest edition of This Day in History. I'll try to be up here with another one in the very near future. Let me know any memories or thoughts or opinions you might have on the Mind Games pay-per-view or that Monday Night Raw in 1997, and what you guys liked and disliked about it. Speaking of liking, if you liked this video, please click that like button, subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to go to my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com, like my Facebook page, follow me on Twitter, and listen to me on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. I will catch you guys in just a few days. Until next time, peace.